This week we're going to turn our attention back to the Motown and soul stylings of Curtis Mayfield. We'll use his song People Get Ready as our general template while we explore more of those muscle shoals and stack style chord tricks and double stops. And then we'll move on to a lead study that again focuses heavily on double stops and chord-based tricks, as well as blending major and minor pentatonic scales. So we're in the key of D, and our basic changes would simply be D, B minor 7, G, D, F sharp minor 7, B minor 7, G, D. We're going to do this one finger style, although it does work just as well strummed or hybrid picked, whichever you prefer. So to get hold of my lesson materials for this, including the backing track, do go over to the links in the description. I do have a Patreon page where for a very small monthly cost you get access to all of my lessons and loads of bonus lessons too. Or if you just want to purchase this one lesson in particular, go to the Gumroad link. Either way, your support is massively appreciated, so thank you so much. We start on our D chord here at the 5th fret of the A string. This is what you might think of as your A shape from the caged system. We hit the whole chord at once. So for the right hand, that's the thumb on the A string, then the first finger, second finger and third finger on strings D, G and B. Hit the whole thing together. Then we go to the B minor 7, so that's our 6th chord, our relative minor. And we're only picking out strings E, D and G this time. 1, 2 and 3, 4. So we bring that B minor 7 in on the and of 2. 1, 2 and 3, 4. Then beat 4 we just have a rest. It's good to put these gaps in because it actually punctuates the rhythm better. You might also want to include a little bit of a percussive slap where those rests would be, again just to further accentuate the rhythm. Now for our next chord, the G chord, we're going to do one of these tricks we've looked at a couple of times in my Americana studies. In the past we've done it on this string set here where we'd have, for example, a D major triad, first inversion, string set 2, and hammer on to the G note on the D string and let everything ring. And we looked at that as a sus4 kind of sound, where we had a D chord and we added the sus4 before removing it. Now we're doing the same thing today, but we're moving it onto the next string set. So we're moving it to strings A, D and G. And this time we're kind of looking at it the other way around. We're thinking it's like a G sus2. There's the root, here's the sus2, and here's the 5th. So that's an interesting thing, isn't it? That the D sus4 and the G sus2 can be basically the same thing. And then we're resolving back to the D major triad in first inversion. And again, you've either got the option of leaving a little rest to punctuate the rhythm, or use one of those gentle percussive strikes on the back of your nails. Then we play this simple little D major pentatonic line, hammering on from 7 to 9 on the D string, and then playing 7 and 9 on the G string. And remember that the D major pentatonic is the same thing as your B minor pentatonic. It's just important that when you think D major pentatonic, you make a B line for these notes, D, the root. So you're framing it slightly differently. Now we move to the F sharp minor 7, rooted on the A string. Again, this would be like your A shape from the caged system. It looks very much like an open A minor 7 chord. Hit the whole chord together, and then add the little finger to 12 on the B string and pick that note. So that's like a minor 11 type of sound. And then go back to your B minor 7, only this time include the B string. So the E, D, G and B. And then just strike the D, G and B strings again. Then we're moving to a G major triad on string set 2, root position, to a D major triad, string set 2, first inversion. That little trick there on the G major, a simple little hammer on to the B string 5th fret with the little finger. Make it a fast hammer on, not. And also lift the fingers away from the fretboard a little bit as soon as you've done that hammer on to give it more of that staccato Motown vibe. And then there's your D major. So it's like a G to D. Beautiful way to do it. So our first section sounds like this. 3, 4. Now for the next bit, we're going to get a little closer to the song by quoting the actual vocal melody. So we play a D major chord down here in open position, hit all 4 strings together, and then hammer on to the little finger at the 3rd fret of the top E string to add that sus4 sound, and take it away and pick that top string again. And then we can keep the 3rd finger where it is and move your other 2 fingers, so we end up forming this shell voicing for a B minor 7, root, flat 7, flat 3. Notice how we're skipping the D string here. And we pick out specifically strings A and B together, and then the G afterwards while it continues to ring. And then for the G major, we're going to take a G triad here, string set 2, root position, and we're going to do the typical Hendrix grip, hook the thumb over to add the low bass note at the 3rd fret of the low E string. We pick strings E, D and G together, and then B string, G string, while everything rings. And then back to D, this time sus2, and then bring in the major 3rd on top. Now we move on to that F sharp minor 7 again. We're going to go all the way up to the 9th fret just like before, but we're going to do a little peel in the right hand, where we let the notes unfold gradually. Thumb, 1st finger, 2nd finger, 3rd finger. Practice rolling the fingers and curling them up into the middle of your hand. And then we do a little trill to that 12 and back. Very typical kind of R&B sound, that. And then we come back down through the chord picking strings G and D. Very pretty. And then B minor 7, we're actually just going to grab this B minor triad here. 1st inversion, string set 2, and we're going to slide in from a semitone below. And then 1st finger can grab the 10th fret of the B string after you lift the little finger away. It's like a B minor 7. Back to that D major pentatonic, pulling off 9 to 7 on the G string, then the 9 on the D string. And then we go back down to this G major triad again, where previously we did this. This time we're going to do something a little different. We're going to take that G major triad, but we're going to put the A in the bass. It's a great chord, this. It's like an A9 sus4, another thing that I've spoken about in many of my videos before. Check out the G Baby Ain't I Good To You video, or the Americana open chord study. We mentioned this type of chord quite a bit in both of those. So it's as if we've got the triad of the 4 chord, but the bass note of the 5. Kind of sitting on the fence there, whether we want a perfect or a plagal cadence as we go back to the D. And fingering, you can use the thumb, or you can spare up the 3rd finger for that bass note, whatever you prefer. And then we're going back to our D chord with a full C shape here. Root, 3rd, 5th root. When it comes to these kind of chord grips, as always, I'd really recommend practicing every possible fingering for it, because you will need them all. Remember that it's the context and where you're coming from and where you're going to that's going to dictate the fingering that you should use. There's more than one way for every chord. So here's both those options back to back. No thumb, or with the thumb. Now let's take a detour for a moment and talk a little more about these chord-based riffs and tricks and ways that I would visualize them. So first off, I do think it's really important to get to grips with your caged system. So let's take a D chord, and let's start here with the C shape. Now you can include the top E string, or you can ignore that. A lot of the time when you play this as a chord shape, you'd probably not bother with that top E string, to be honest. But make sure you can visualize the whole thing. Now you've got your A shape here, where again you'd actually be visualizing this top E string 5th fret as part of the shape, as if you were playing it the classical way. And then you've got your G shape, bit of a tricky one, and again you wouldn't really tend to plant this as a full shape, but it's important that you can visualize it. And then you've got your E shape, of course, probably the most common one that everybody knows about when it comes to bar chords. And then you've got your D shape. So you've got your 5 basic ways there of playing a D major chord. Now I also like to visualize triads as well as this caged system, and you can see how the two things relate. So for example, if you start here with your D major triad, string set 1, second inversion, and then you start to descend through your string sets, you'll end up in this borderline area here between the C shape and the A shape. Of course, we started in a borderline area that is shared territory between the D shape and the C shape. So it's an interesting thing. You start to notice these things. It's just going to help with your confidence of finding things on the fingerboard. Move that across to your next inversion. So this would be the root position D major triad. And again, if you follow your descending triads through the string sets, you're going to end up in your G shape. So we started in the A shape and then passed over to the G shape. Similar thing here, next inversion. This would be part of your E shape. This is our first inversion D major triad. Follow through your string sets. You end up in the bass end of your D shape. So it's all connected, and you need a thorough map of the fingerboard, and like when you're mapping anything out, you need multiple mapping systems. It's not just one way. Now scale-wise, within each of those zones, just as a starting point, I'd recommend working on your D major pentatonic. So for example, D with a C shape, here's the major pentatonic. With the A shape, here's your major pentatonic. With the G shape, here's your major pentatonic. With the E shape, and then with the D shape, just starting with those root to root shapes is enough for now. It's going to give you plenty of stuff to play around with. Now, of course, we could go on for days and days about this stuff and go deeper and deeper into it. It's pretty much limitless. But for now, let me just give you one particular, what I would regard common or essential chord-based trick within each one of those zones. So within our C shape, I'm going to recommend that you play around within this area here, where you've got your first inversion major triad on string set 2. And we just want to explore things, right? So we're going to mess around with hammer-ons from the 2nd to the 4th fret of the D string, for example. Works really well as double stops, hitting the D and G strings together. You've got the 5th fret if you want to add that sus4 kind of sound again. You've also got this double stop here that you can slide up a whole tone and back. This would be part of your D major pentatonic. Some great stuff to explore in there. Within the A shape, I'm going to recommend just focusing on the top 3 strings to begin with. Here's your D major triad, major pentatonic. So you can mess around with all these common Hendrixisms. What about the G shape? Let's focus in on the shape without the 2 E strings involved, first of all. Very common portion of that gets used. Again, very Hendrixy to my ear. This would be a D major triad first inversion, just like this was. Now I'd recommend, again, just like we did there, hammering on. All those beautiful double stops. Strings A and D, strings D and G, strings G and B. Now the E shape. Let's take just the top 4 strings. Mess around with hammer-ons again, to 12 and back on the B string, sliding the double stop up to 12 and back, major pentatonic, G and B strings, again major pentatonic, or just simply hammering on to the major 3rd from the 2nd degree of the scale. Root. These are things that we explored deeply in a couple of my other lessons, so do check those out if you haven't seen them yet. I'm thinking specifically the Soul Americana lesson and my original Motown and Soul lesson. And then finally, the D shape. I'd recommend checking out some double stops from the major pentatonic here. On the top 3 strings. Very pretty. Now, one really cool feature here is that you can link some of these zones together. For example, the A shape links nicely to the G shape. also the E shape links to the D shape in a very nice, comfortable way. Check it out. So of course we're just scratching the surface there, and we will go deeper and deeper into these ideas in future lessons. So I'm going to let you guys crack on with learning the chord part for this, and then in next week's lesson, part 2, we're going to be looking at the lead study. Just before I sign off, let's have a little bit of tone talk. I'm using my Nachocaster for this, and I'm on the neck pickup, and this is running into a Jam Pedals Harmonious Monk, where I've got the trem set on the harmonic trem setting. It's a beautiful sounding tremolo. And then I'm running into the Strymon Flint for a little bit of reverb, and then the amplifier is my Lazy J20, which is one of the best amps I've ever owned, definitely my favourite Tweed style amp. Then we're going into the aux box, and then straight into my audio interface, my Apollo Twin. For the lead study, I'll be using a Dunlop H3 pick, doesn't bend at all, just how I like it. So if I can ask you guys to do all the usual stuff to show some support, like, share, comment, that would be awesome, really does make a big difference. And do let me know in the comments if you have any questions at all. I always aim to answer very quickly. And do head over and have a gander at the Patreon. There's tons of stuff on there now, and we have over 500 members, good bunch of people. And enjoy working on some of these Curtis Mayfield style ideas, and I'll see you guys next week for part 2, the lead study.